Lena arrived at the community hall earlier than anyone else that morning. She liked coming before the noise, before people started rushing in and out, before the sound of footsteps and chatter filled the corridors. The place always felt peaceful at sunrise. A soft orange glow came through the tall windows of the main rehearsal room, and the dust in the air looked like floating gold. For her, it felt like stepping into a quiet world where nothing existed except the piano waiting in the corner. She carried her music folder pressed against her chest, trying not to drop anything. The big school recital was only 3 days away, and she still didn't feel ready. She believed in the piece she had chosen, but she didn't fully believe in herself. Her fingers worked hard, her mind tried its best, but her heart often got in the way. Every mistake felt heavy. Every pause felt like the world was judging her. Sometimes she wished she could borrow someone else's confidence. Just for one day. She reached the piano, placed her folder on top, and gently lifted the cover. The keys were cool to the touch, and she let her hands rest on them for a moment before she started. She took a slow breath, the kind her teacher always insisted on, and played the first note soft and unsure at first, then steady. The melody began to shape the room. It was a sweet but sad tune, the kind that wraps around you like a quiet memory. Lena had found the sheet in a small second-hand shop weeks ago. It wasn't part of any famous collection. There was no composer name written cleanly on the page, just a faint signature smudged at the bottom, almost unreadable. She wasn't sure what drew her to it. Something about it felt personal, like a whisper from someone she didn't know, but could somehow understand. Her fingers moved gently across the keys. She tried to make every note sound like it had meaning, like it came from somewhere deep inside. She wasn't the kind of pianist who impressed people with speed or big dramatic moments. Her strength came from emotion, even though she didn't always see it that way. When she played, she didn't think about perfect technique or exact timing. She just tried to make the music feel honest. As the melody filled the room, she forgot about her nerves. She forgot about the recital. She forgot about everything except the sound she was creating. The large hall echoed softly, giving each note a little more life. It made her feel brave in a way she rarely felt at school or anywhere else. She didn't notice the door open behind her. Judge Harrow stepped inside with a stack of documents in one hand and a sharp look in his eyes. He wasn't tall in an intimidating way, but his presence carried a certain weight. People who knew him, even from a distance, described him as strict, cold, and distant. He walked with purpose, always seeming to be in the middle of something serious. And whether he realized it or not, he usually gave the impression that he didn't have time for people's feelings. He wasn't supposed to be in the hall at that hour. His meeting with a council group had been scheduled early, and they had mistakenly directed him to the wrong room. Still, once he entered and heard the music, he didn't look pleased. His steps froze for a moment, but not out of admiration. If anything, the sound seemed to irritate him, as if the melody was disrupting some invisible barrier he kept around himself. Lena continued playing, unaware of him for a few more seconds. Then she felt a shift in the air, that uncomfortable sense that someone was watching. She turned her head slightly and saw him standing there. Her hands slipped on the keys, causing an awkward chord to break the beauty of the piece. She spun fully around on the bench. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said quickly. "Am I too early? I thought no one was scheduled in this room." The judge didn't answer right away. His face held that tight expression he wore most days, something between impatience and a tired kind of authority. "This room is reserved for a meeting," he said, his voice low but firm. "The sound carries through the whole building. It's quite loud." Lena felt her cheeks warm. She didn't want to cause trouble. "I'm really sorry. I didn't know." He stepped further inside, glancing at the piano as if it were the source of a problem rather than an instrument. Please stop playing for now. People are on their way." His tone wasn't shouting, but it was cold enough to make her chest tighten. She nodded quickly. "Yes, of course." She closed the piano cover gently, though her hands were shaking slightly. She hated feeling like she had done something wrong, especially when she hadn't meant to disturb anyone. She reached for her music folder, but as she picked it up, a few sheets slipped out and scattered onto the floor. She crouched down to collect them before the judge could say anything else. He stood silently, watching her with an unreadable expression. He didn't offer to help. He didn't soften his tone. He simply waited. When she finally gathered her things, she gave a small, nervous smile. "I'll find another place to practice." The judge didn't respond with understanding or kindness. He just turned away slightly, as if the conversation had already ended. Lena walked toward the door, with her folder held firmly against her. She paused for a second before leaving, hoping maybe he would say something less harsh. But he didn't. He didn't even look back at her dot as she stepped into the hallway. She felt a mix of embarrassment and disappointment. She had come early to work hard, to build confidence, to feel ready. Instead, she felt like someone had pushed her right back into her shell. She took a deep breath and tried to push the feeling away. She didn't want to cry. Not there, not in a public hallway, not over something so small. But emotions aren't always logical, and her eyes still stung Dot. She started walking down the corridor, hoping one of the smaller practice rooms might be open. The building was old, full of narrow passageways and echoing spaces. Her footsteps sounded louder than usual, maybe because the melody she had been playing still lingered faintly in her mind. Every hallway she passed seemed already occupied. The music program students were practicing for upcoming school shows, and the adult choir had taken 2 of the better rooms. She didn't want to go home. Home meant noise, chores, and siblings asking for help with homework. It meant no quiet place for her music. She needed the next few days to prepare carefully. She had promised her teacher she would put real effort into this recital, not just show up and hope for the best. She checked another door, but it was locked. The next one had a sign saying, "Reserved." She sighed softly and kept walking. Down the hallway, near the maintenance area, she spotted someone she recognized, the janitor. Mr. Halle. He was an older man with kind eyes and a gentle way of speaking. He noticed her before she even said anything. "You look troubled," he said, pushing his cleaning cart aside. "Everything all right?" She hesitated. She didn't want to complain about the judge or seem ungrateful. "I was practicing in the main hall, but I got asked to leave. I'm trying to find another room." Mr. Halle nodded slowly. He had been working there long enough to understand exactly how things worked and how people behaved. "I see," he said with a small sigh. He glanced down the hallway, thinking. Then he gave her a warm smile. "Come with me. I think I know a place." He led her down a short flight of steps to a storage room at the far end of the building. It wasn't glamorous. Boxes lined the shelves, an old lamp sat in the corner, and a slightly dusty upright piano stood against the wall. The room smelled faintly of old wood and cleaning supplies, but it was quiet. It was private. And for Lina, it was perfect. "It's not much," he said, opening the door wider, "but no one uses it during the day. You can practice here as long as you need." Her eyes brightened with relief. "Thank you," she said sincerely. He nodded. "Just don't forget to turn off the light when you're done." She smiled. "I won't." When Mr. Halle left, she set her folder on top of the piano and opened the cover again. The keys weren't as smooth as the ones in the main hall, and one of the lower notes sounded a little uneven, but that didn't matter. She placed her fingers on the keys and breathed in. The quietness of the room made everything feel intimate. Almost comforting Dot, she began the melody again, slowly this time, letting each note settle in the air. In that small, dusty room, the music sounded different, more personal, less polished. She felt surrounded by the song, as if the walls themselves were listening. The sound soothed her frustration. It washed away the judge's cold tone, the embarrassment she felt when her sheets scattered on the floor, the heaviness of the morning. Here, in this hidden place, she wasn't in anyone's way. She wasn't being judged. She was simply a girl playing a song she cared about. Her fingers moved with more emotion than before. She closed her eyes as she played, trying to let the music guide her instead of fear or pressure. Each note seemed to tell a story she didn't fully understand, but could somehow feel. The melody carried a quiet sadness, like someone trying to say something they never had the chance to say. She didn't know that just outside. Down the same hallway she had walked earlier, Judge Harrow was still nearby. She didn't know that the melody she played would soon pull him back toward memories he had tried to bury. For now, she played alone, unaware that her music had already begun to change something far bigger than she could imagine. Judge Harrow walked briskly through the hallway, holding his folder of documents tightly in one hand. He didn't look back at the rehearsal room he had just left, even though the faint echo of the piano still lingered in the back of his mind. He tried to shake it off the way he shook off most things that weren't practical, logical, or necessary. To him, anything that stirred feelings was simply something that slowed life down. He had spent years building that mindset, shaping it carefully like a wall that kept everything soft or painful on the other side. People who knew him only in his official role assumed he was naturally cold, that he had always been that way. But those who knew him before long, before he became known as the stern voice behind a courtroom desk, remembered a very different man. A man who used to smile easily, who played piano himself sometimes, who once said music felt like a place where the world couldn't touch him. But that version of him hadn't existed for years. As he walked, his phone buzzed. He checked the screen only to find a message reminding him of the morning meeting. He sighed. Meetings, documents, schedules, these were predictable. They didn't surprise him. They didn't hurt. They didn't bring back memories he had tried so hard to bury. The community hall was already filling with people, arriving early for their different programs. Choir members spoke in groups near the main office. A few parents dropped off their children for art class. Someone greeted him politely, but he only nodded without slowing his pace. People rarely expected warmth from him anymore, so no one seemed offended by his short replies. In a way, everyone had adjusted to who he had become. He turned a corner and entered a small office room where a long table had been set up. The council group hadn't arrived yet. They were known for being a few minutes late. That gave him time to organize his documents, though he hardly needed to. His papers were always arranged carefully, each clipped neatly, each in its own place. He sat down and let out a slow breath, but the moment his mind quieted, his thoughts traveled back to the sound he had heard earlier, the melody coming from the piano, the one the girl had been playing. He had snapped at her, though he hadn't meant to be harsh. It wasn't her fault. She had done nothing wrong. It wasn't even the volume of the music that bothered him. It was the song. There was something strangely familiar about it. He had recognized the opening notes, even though he hadn't heard them in years. His chest tightened just thinking about it. He didn't want to remember. He didn't want to feel anything connected to that memory. He came here to get things done, not to revisit emotions that he thought he had locked away forever. The soft melody tugged at the back of his mind again. He clenched his jaw. Enough, he muttered to himself, trying to push it away. He didn't realize someone had entered the room until a voice broke the silence. "Good morning." "Judge." He looked up sharply, then relaxed just enough to appear polite. It was Mr. Turner, a man from the council board. The others followed behind him, They took their seats, opening folders and whispering to each other about the agenda for the day. Judge Harrow straightened in his chair, his face shifting into the neutral expression he always used in public. He nodded and prepared to start the meeting. For the next hour, he spoke only when necessary, listening to updates about building maintenance, local events, and funding proposals. His answers were short, to the point, efficient. To most people in that room, he seemed fully focused. But inside he wasn't. That melody kept returning, like an unwelcome guest tapping on the door of his memory. He wished he didn't recognize it. He wished it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered more than anyone there could ever guess. His late wife, Elena, used to play that same melody. Not often, not for anyone else, only at home, late at night when she thought he was asleep. She had written it herself during one of the hardest periods of her life. At first, he didn't know she was composing anything. She didn't talk about it, didn't announce it like some musicians do when they start a new piece. She simply played around with it when she felt overwhelmed, as if the notes helped her breathe a little easier. Sometimes he would wake up and quietly walk down the hallway just to listen to her play. She didn't know he watched her sit at the piano with her shoulders slightly curved forward, her hair falling softly around her face, her fingers touching the keys as if they were fragile. The soft light from the lamp beside her created a warm glow around her, making the moment feel peaceful, even though everything else in their life was not. She used to smile faintly when she played, even on nights when she had cried herself to sleep earlier. That melody had been her comfort, something she carried through long months of illness. And he had tried to be strong for her. He always believed that if he stayed steady, if he stayed calm, she would somehow feel safer. But after she passed, that melody turned into something he avoided at all costs. It wasn't just a reminder. It was like an open door that pulled him back into grief he didn't know how to hold. He hadn't heard it since not once, not until that morning. Played by a teenager who had no idea what the song meant or who it had belonged to, the sound had made him freeze in a way he didn't want anyone to notice. His first instinct had been to shut it off, not because of the girl, not because of the noise, but because he didn't know how else to react. Judge Harrow, your thoughts on the funding request? The question snapped him out of his memories. He looked up at the council members staring back at him, waiting for his answer. His mind scrambled to catch up to the conversation. Yes, he said calmly. The request seems reasonable. You may proceed with the recommendation. He didn't even know which request they were talking about, but no one questioned him. They rarely did. After the meeting ended, he let the others leave first. He gathered his papers slowly, trying to steady himself. He didn't like when his mind wandered. It made him feel unprepared, vulnerable, unguarded, all things he had worked hard to avoid. He stepped into the hallway, but instead of heading outside, he walked deeper into the building. He told himself he was simply taking a longer path to clear his thoughts. But his feet moved with a strange mix of reluctance and curiosity. He wasn't proud of how he had spoken to the girl earlier. Even though he believed in rules and order, he wasn't completely heartless. Something about the look on her face when she gathered her sheets bothered him. She had looked embarrassed, maybe even hurt, and he knew that feeling wasn't fair to place on a young student trying her best. He walked past a group of choir, singers practicing harmonies. The sound was light, cheerful, and completely opposite of what he felt. He moved down another hallway, past classrooms and storage closets, until he reached the quiet area near the maintenance room. He almost turned back, then he heard it, the same melody, faint but unmistakable. The same soft, emotional notes drifting from far down the hallway. The same rhythm his wife had once played night after night, like a conversation she wished she could have had with life itself, His chest tightened again. He took a slow step forward, then another. He followed the sound like someone walking toward a memory they didn't want but couldn't escape. The melody grew clearer with each step, each note stirring something inside him he had locked away years ago. When he reached the corner, he stopped. The door to a small storage room was slightly open. Warm yellow light spilled into the hallway. Inside, he could hear the girl Lina playing with more emotion than before. Not perfect technique, not showy skills, but real feeling. The kind that doesn't try to impress anyone. The kind his wife used to have. He stood still, stunned, unable to move. He hadn't expected the music to affect him this deeply. He hadn't expected it to sound so familiar, so heartbreakingly gentle. He hadn't expected a stranger to awaken something he believed he had buried forever. As he stood there, frozen in the hallway, he realized something quietly painful. The world had kept moving forward, but he had not. He stayed rooted in his memories. While life had continued around him, offering moments he never allowed himself to see. And now, through a half-open door and a dusty old piano, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time, something like a small crack in the wall he had built around his heart. He didn't know what to do with that feeling. So for the moment, he did nothing. He just listened. Lina stayed in the little storage room longer than she planned. She didn't even realize how much time had passed until her fingers started to feel tired. The small lamp beside the piano made the whole room feel warm and gentle, as if the space itself was trying to protect her from everything outside. She took a small break, letting her hands rest in her lap, and looked at the sheet music again. The pages were old, a little yellow around the edges. The ink was faded in some spots, especially near the bottom where the signature was. She tried again to make out the letters, but they were too smudged to read. Sometimes she wondered who the original composer had been. Maybe it was someone forgotten by the world. Or maybe it was someone who didn't care about fame and just wrote the song for a personal reason. Whatever the truth was, the piece always made her feel something she couldn't explain. The melody had a softness to it that felt comforting, but there was also a hidden sadness beneath it, like someone had written it while trying not to cry. Whenever she played it, she felt as if she was telling someone's story, even though she didn't know whose. She brushed her thumb lightly over the paper and smiled a little. If she could play this piece well at the recital, it might be the first time people truly listened to her. Not just heard her, but actually listened. That mattered to her. She lifted her hands again and started from the beginning. This time she tried to pay attention to the feelings inside the song, instead of worrying about how she looked while playing. Each note echoed gently in the small room. Even the flaws seemed to blend in naturally, like part of the emotion. She leaned closer to the keys, letting the tune guide her. She had no idea someone was standing quietly outside. Judge Harrow hadn't planned on staying. When he first heard the melody again, he told himself he would walk away, that he was simply passing by and had no reason to intrude. But as he stood there, listening from the doorway, something inside him refused to leave. He watched her play through the narrow crack between the door and the frame. She was completely unaware of him watching. Something about her posture reminded him of his wife, not because they looked the same, but because of the way she leaned into the music, as if she trusted it more than she trusted anything else. He remembered how his wife used to sit at their old piano, shoulders slightly curved, head tilted gently, eyes half closed. It wasn't the appearance that struck him now. It was the sincerity. The girl wasn't performing. She was feeling, just like Lina. He swallowed hard and lowered his gaze. His chest tightened again, that familiar ache he thought he had trained himself to ignore. For years, he had avoided anything that reminded him of her, not just the song, but anything related to music. He had boxed up her sheet music, closed her piano lid, and never played again. People said time healed everything, but time had only made him colder, not stronger. He tried to survive by becoming distant, but this moment was forcing him to see something he didn't expect. A young girl, playing his wife's melody, breathing life into something he thought he had lost forever. He stepped back quietly, not wanting to disturb her again. He didn't know what to do with all these emotions suddenly pushing forward. He wasn't ready to face them. Not yet. So he turned around and left the hallway, but the sound followed him long after the door faded from view. Inside the room, Lena finished the piece and took another deep breath. She stretched her arms above her head, feeling her muscles loosen. The break was short, because she didn't want to lose momentum. She played again, this time focusing on the soft parts, letting the notes float gently through the room. Like slow-moving feathers dot, she didn't know how deeply her music had affected someone that morning. After a while, her stomach growled. She glanced at the clock mounted on the wall. It was almost lunchtime. She hadn't planned to stay in the building for so long. If she didn't get home soon, her mother would question her for being late. And she didn't want her to worry. She closed the piano lid carefully, gathered her sheet music, and turned off the lamp as Mr. Hawley had asked. The hallway outside felt cooler, almost empty. The building had moments during the day where it became quiet between programs, and she liked those moments. It gave her time to breathe without feeling watched or judged as she walked. She thought again about the judge from earlier. She wished she didn't feel so embarrassed about the way he'd spoken to her. But she couldn't help it. There was something heavy about his presence, something that made her feel small, even when she wasn't doing anything wrong. She wondered if he talked to everyone that way, or if she had been unlucky. Still, she tried to push the thought out of her mind. Maybe he was just having a tough morning. Adults always said they had bad days too, but they never explained what that really meant. She tried to imagine what kind of life a judge had. Maybe he was tired from long cases. Maybe he was stressed from work. Maybe he didn't actually mean to sound so cold. She walked toward the building exit and stepped outside. The fresh air felt nice compared to the dusty storage room. People were walking around the street. Cars passed by, and a few kids were riding bicycles near the park. It looked like a normal day. She started heading home, replaying the song in her mind. Even when she wasn't touching the piano, the notes still traveled with her. She hummed the tune under her breath as she walked. Back at the community hall, Judge Harrow returned to his office. He placed his documents on the desk and sat down heavily, staring at nothing in particular. He had held himself together through years of loss, responsibilities, and silence. Yet today, his composure felt unusually thin, like a glass wall with a tiny crack. He closed his eyes for a moment. There she was again, Elena. He could picture her as clearly, as if she were standing in the room. Her warm smile, her gentle voice, the softness in her hands when she touched his shoulder. He hadn't allowed himself to think about her this way in a long time. The memories were too sharp, too vivid. They didn't comfort him. They opened old wounds. He tried to push the thoughts away, but they kept coming. How she would sit at the piano, even when she was tired. How she used to say music gave her hope. How she had written that melody during a time when she had almost given up. He remembered how she had played this song for him one night and whispered, "This one feels like a promise, doesn't it?" He hadn't understood what she meant then. Not fully. He had told her the music sounded beautiful, but he didn't know the pain behind it. Now he did. He reached into his desk drawer and took out a small photo frame. He hadn't looked at it in months. The picture inside showed him and Elena on a quiet morning, sitting on the bench outside their old house. She was laughing at something he had said. He wasn't sure what it was anymore, but she looked so alive, so happy. It didn't match the heaviness he carried now. He touched the edge of the frame with his thumb and let out a slow, shaky breath. The world had changed so much since she passed. People saw him as cold because they didn't understand the weight he carried. Maybe they didn't need to understand. He had gotten used to living behind a wall. But that girl's melody, it cracked open something he thought was sealed forever. He set the photo down and rubbed his temples. He felt drained, not physically but emotionally. He wasn't used to feeling anything this deeply anymore. It unsettled him. Meanwhile, Lena reached home and greeted her mother, who was preparing lunch. She helped set the table, still humming the melody as she placed the dishes down. Her mother noticed and smiled. "You're in a good mood," she said. Lena shrugged lightly. "Just practicing a lot today." As they ate, her mother asked about school, friends, and the recital. Lena answered honestly, but didn't mention the judge. She didn't want to sound upset, and besides, the storage room had saved her day in the end. After lunch, she went to her room and placed the sheet music on her desk. She read through it again, tracing the notes with her finger. She wondered if she should try to change anything or add her own twist, but something told her not to. The piece felt complete as it was, like it had been written with a certain emotion that shouldn't be changed. The rest of her day passed quietly. She practiced again in the evening using a small keyboard at home, though it didn't feel the same as a real piano. The sound was thinner, and the keys were lighter, but she still tried her best. She wanted to honor the piece, even if she didn't know its full story. Across town, Judge Harrow left the building after his work was finished. On his way out, he passed through the same hallway where he had heard the music earlier. This time, the silence bothered him. It felt incomplete, like a conversation cut short. He stood still for a moment, staring at the closed storage room door. Then he turned away, walking outside into the cool evening air. He didn't know it yet, but his life had already started to shift. Not from a dramatic event, not from a loud change, but from a quiet melody played by someone who had no idea what her music meant. And for the first time in years, the coldness he carried wasn't the only thing he felt. Something else was quietly growing behind it, something he had almost forgotten how to feel. The next morning arrived slowly, as if even the sun wasn't sure it should rise after such a heavy night. The judge woke earlier than usual, not because he had slept well, but because he kept turning from side to side with the sound of that forgotten melody echoing in his mind. It was strange for him. He usually woke with a head full of law cases, arguments, and decisions. But today his mind was filled with soft notes, played by a girl who had no idea what they meant to him. He sat at the side of his bed for a long moment, staring at the floor. His house felt colder than before, almost hollow, yet something in him felt strangely awake for the first time in years. It wasn't peaceful, but it wasn't painful either. It was something in between, something that made him breathe differently, slower, as if he was afraid the memory would disappear if he moved too fast. He finally stood and went into the small living room, where an old upright piano sat against the wall. It had been untouched for so long that a thin layer of dust coated the keys. He ran his fingers over them without pressing down, just tracing the shape of something that once brought life into his home. The piano had once filled this house with laughter, songs, and warm evenings. Now it was nothing more than a silent reminder of a life he once had. He hesitated, then slowly pressed one key. It made a dull sound, slightly out of tune. He pressed another, then the opening notes of the same song the girl had played. His hands shook halfway through, and he pulled them back as if the keys had burned him. He took a step away and closed his eyes. He couldn't do it. Not yet. At the music center across town, the girl woke up with a sense of excitement mixed with confusion. She kept replaying the judge's reaction in her mind. His face had gone pale when she played that song. At first, she thought he was angry again, but then she noticed something else, something soft in the way he had stared at the piano, something almost broken. She didn't know what it meant, but she felt she had touched something important inside him. She got ready for her day, trying to convince herself not to be nervous. She had been asked to come earlier for practice before the hall got busy. She wasn't sure if the judge would return, and honestly, she hoped he wouldn't, at least not angry the way he was at first. But a small part of her wondered if she would see him again, and whether he might speak to her differently this time. When she reached the hall, the lights were still dim, and the air felt cool and quiet. She crossed the empty floor and sat at the piano. She didn't play immediately. Instead, she rested her hands gently on the keys, thinking of the judge's face when he heard her playing the day before. Something about the memory made her heart tighten slightly, not with fear, but with something like empathy. She didn't know the full story, but she could feel that her music had touched him in a deeper way than she had expected. When she finally began to play, she chose a different slow piece, something calm and warm. Her fingers moved softly, as if she didn't want to disturb the peace of the empty hall. She didn't hear the judge enter through the side door, and he didn't announce himself. He stood silently near the back of the hall, watching her hands move. For a moment, he simply listened. It was strange for him to be there so early. Court didn't start for hours, and he rarely left his home without a reason. But he felt pulled there, drawn by something he couldn't explain. He didn't plan to speak to her. He only wanted to listen, to understand why her music made him feel something he had locked away for years. She finished the piece slowly. When she lifted her fingers from the keys, she heard a quiet sound in the hall. She turned and saw him standing there. He looked different today. He wasn't standing stiff or stern like the day before. His shoulders were relaxed, his expression softer, almost uncertain. She didn't know what to say, but she stood up politely. "Good morning," she said gently. He took a few slow steps toward her. "Good morning." She waited for him to say something else, but he seemed to struggle to find the right words. His eyes drifted to the piano bench, then back to her. "You played yesterday," he began, and his voice had a tremble she didn't expect. "That song, the one you played when I walked in." She nodded. "It just came to me. I don't know where I heard it." His breathing slowed as he stared at the piano again. "You must have heard it somewhere. I suppose it was popular many years ago." She shook her head. "I don't really listen to old music. I mostly learn by hearing people. But I swear, I never heard anyone play that melody before." His eyebrows lifted slightly, as if he wasn't sure he believed her. But something in her honest tone softened him further. He walked closer to the piano and sat down on the long wooden bench beside her, not too close, but close enough that she could sense his uneasiness. He pressed a single key, then another, trying to recall the memory of the melody. She watched him carefully, sensing his discomfort. "Yesterday," he said quietly, "you played a song that meant a great deal to someone I cared for. I haven't heard it since she—" His voice broke, and he stopped. She didn't push him. She simply waited. After a long pause, he stood up. "I don't know how you knew it, but when you played it, it felt like the past was suddenly sitting right in front of me." She felt a soft ache inside. She didn't know his full story, but it was clear he wasn't just a strict man. He was someone who carried a quiet sadness behind his stern expression. "Sometimes," she said, "music finds people when they need it." He looked at her with surprise, then nodded slowly, as if her simple words had struck him deeper than she intended. One of the instructors arrived, breaking the quiet moment. The judge stepped back, straightening his coat. Before he left, he turned to her once more. "If you don't mind," he said softly, "I would like to hear you play again. Not today, maybe, but soon." She smiled. "I don't mind at all." He gave a small nod and walked away. She watched him leave with a strange sense of understanding forming inside her. She felt like she had touched something fragile in him, something he didn't let anyone see. Later that afternoon, she told the story to one of her closest friends, unsure how to describe the feeling. Her friend listened with wide eyes, surprised at how someone as intimidating as a judge could show such emotion. "That's incredible," her friend said. "Maybe you reminded him of something beautiful." "Maybe," she said quietly. But that night, as she practiced alone, something shifted inside her. She kept thinking of his reaction, his voice, the pain he tried to hide. She played the melody again, letting it fill the empty room slowly. The notes felt different this time, not just sad, but heavy with memory. Meanwhile, the judge sat at home again, staring at the old piano. He didn't touch the keys. Instead, he sat quietly with his hands in his lap, replaying her music in his mind. It wasn't just the song. It was the sincerity in her playing, the gentleness, the way it pulled something out of him he thought he had buried forever. The next day, he returned to the hall. This time, he brought something with him, an old sheet of handwritten music, slightly yellow with age. It was the original copy of the song his wife had written long ago. The girl was practicing again when he approached her. She looked up and smiled politely. He didn't speak at first. He simply handed her the folded paper. "This," he said quietly, "belongs to the only person who ever played that song the way you did." She unfolded it gently, looking at the notes written in careful handwriting. There were small markings in pencil, tiny adjustments made over time. She could almost feel the life behind it. "Did she write it?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yes." She traced the first few notes with her eyes and understood now why it had meant so much to him. "Would you teach me?" she asked. "I want to play it the way she meant it to sound." The judge blinked, surprised by her request. He hadn't taught anything in years, and certainly not music, but after a long moment, he nodded. "I can try." And in that quiet hall, something new began something neither of them expected. It wasn't just about music. Any more. It was about healing. It was about two very different lives slowly learning to understand each other. It was the start of a connection that would change both of them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. In the days that followed, something gentle and unexpected began to grow between the judge and the young girl. It didn't happen suddenly. It happened quietly, like a small light in a dark room that slowly became brighter without anyone noticing at first. Every morning, after he finished his early tasks, the judge found himself walking toward the music hall. He didn't rush. He didn't plan it. His feet simply carried him there, as if the sound of the piano had become a part of his daily life again. And each day, she would already be practicing when he arrived, her hands moving over the keys with a mix of confidence and curiosity. At first, he just listened. He would stand at the back of the hall, letting the soft notes wash over him. But soon, she began turning to greet him with a small smile whenever he walked in. He still kept his distance, unsure of how close he was allowed to come to this new world she had opened in him. But she made the space feel safe, almost warm. One morning, she asked him if they could sit together so she could show him the part of his late wife's melody she had been practicing. He sat down beside her on the long bench, his posture stiff at first. But as she began to play, he leaned forward slightly, listening with such attention that she felt a nervous flutter in her chest. When she reached a certain part, she paused and looked at him. "I think this section is meant to change emotion, but I'm not sure how." He hesitated. He hadn't taught music in decades, but he knew this melody more deeply than he knew any written law. He gently lifted his hand, pointing to a note on the page. "She used to tell me," he said slowly, "that this part should feel like like someone taking a breath before saying something important. The girl looked at him, studying the thoughtful expression on his face. "Can you show me?" she asked. He blinked, unsure whether he could still play properly. But she waited patiently, her hands resting on her lap, her eyes encouraging him in a way he hadn't felt in years. So he placed his fingers on the keys. The first few notes shook slightly, his hands trembling with both emotion and lack of practice. But as he moved into the familiar part, the melody became steady. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the memory guide him. He didn't play the whole song, only a small section, but the softness in his playing made her chest tighten with emotion. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "I understand. It has to feel gentle, like someone speaks with love." He lifted his head, surprised at how easily she understood. "Yes," he whispered. She played it back, applying what he had shown her. And as she did, something inside him softened again. She wasn't copying the sound. She was understanding it. She was feeling it. After she finished, he whispered, "That's exactly right." From that morning on, their practices changed. They didn't feel like lessons anymore. They felt like shared moments that helped both of them breathe a little easier. The instructors at the hall noticed the judge's visits, and though they were surprised at first, they were careful not to intrude. They saw how the girl focused differently when he was there, less nervous, more determined. They also saw how the judge seemed to carry himself with lighter shoulders, as if something heavy had finally begun to lift. The girl's friend also noticed the change. One afternoon, as they walked home, her friend nudged her shoulder playfully. "You seem happier these days," the friend said. "I guess I am," she replied with a quiet smile. "He's not cold once you get to know him. He just lost someone important." Her friend nodded softly. "You're helping him remember something good." The girl thought about that. She didn't feel like she was doing anything special. But every time she played that melody, she felt the judge's quiet presence behind her, and she knew she wasn't just learning a song. She was helping him heal something he'd buried for too long. One afternoon, as they practiced, the hall filled with warm sunlight. Dust floated gently through the air, glowing softly. It was one of those peaceful afternoons where the world outside felt far away. She finished the last note of the melody and turned to him. "Can I ask something?" He nodded. "Why did she write this song?" She asked carefully. "Was it for you?" He let out a slow breath, leaning back slightly. The question seemed to settle on him like a quiet weight. He looked at the piano for a long moment before answering. "She wrote it during a time when our lives were changing," he said slowly. "I was working too much. She used to tell me I forgot how to just enjoy things. So she wrote this song for me, to remind me to slow down." The girl's eyes softened. "Did you ever tell her how much it meant to you?" He glanced down at his hands, a look of regret crossing his face. "Not enough. I think she knew, but I should have said it more often. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to." Her silence felt gentle, understanding, and he appreciated that more than she knew. He continued after a pause. "When she passed, I stopped playing. I stopped listening to anything that reminded me of her. I thought avoiding memories would make the pain smaller, but it only made the silence louder." The girl looked at him carefully. "Then why did you come back here that day? Why this place?" He gave a faint, almost embarrassed smile. "Because someone told me this hall had become a meeting place for young players. And I wondered if, maybe, hearing music again would help." "And did it?" she asked softly. He met her eyes, and there was something gentle in his gaze. "Yes, more than I expected." The room felt still for a moment. Not heavy, not sad, just full of something warm and meaningful. After that conversation, they practiced the melody once more. This time, She played with a new understanding, letting her emotion guide her fingers. He watched her, realizing how extraordinary it was that someone so young could bring such depth to a piece she hadn't even known a week before. When she finished, he clapped quietly. She laughed softly, pretending to be shy. "Do you think I'll be ready to play this for the recital?" she asked. He nodded. "You will. And not because you play it perfectly, but because you understand it." Her eyes brightened with pride. The recital was only a week away, and it was the biggest event of the year at the hall. Students, families, and visitors from around the city came to listen. The girl had never performed at such an event before, and part of her felt nervous. But knowing the judge would be there made her feel strangely braver. Something about his steady presence gave her confidence. As the recital day approached, things became busier. The hall filled with students practicing different instruments. The girl tried to find quiet corners to practice the melody, but the judge could always recognize her playing, even from across the hall. The familiar tune always made him turn his head, even when he tried to focus on other things. He found himself looking forward to the recital more than he expected. He told himself it was because he wanted to hear his wife's melody again. But deep down, he knew it was also because he wanted to see the girl succeed. He wanted to see her shine. On the afternoon before the recital, something shifted. The girl arrived later than usual. Her steps hurried and her expression a little tense. The judge noticed immediately. "Is something wrong?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "I'm just nervous, I guess. I've never played in front of so many people." He nodded slowly, understanding more than she realized. Fear shows up when something matters. It's a sign that you care, but it doesn't mean you're not ready. She sighed, fumbling with her fingers. "I don't want to disappoint anyone." He shifted slightly, leaning closer. "Listen to me," he said in a calm voice. "You're not playing to impress anyone. You're sharing something meaningful. Those who understand music will feel it. Those who don't understand will still feel the emotion. No one will look for mistakes." She swallowed hard. "But what if I forget a part?" He smiled for the first time that day. A warm, sincere smile. "Then you keep going. Music isn't about perfect notes. It's about heart." She took in his words slowly, letting them settle into her. And somehow, the fear inside her softened. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. "You'll be ready tomorrow." She played the melody once more before leaving. It floated through the hall, gentle and full of emotion, and he felt something warm move through him. Not sadness, not grief, something like comfort. When she finished, she looked at him one more time before heading out. "Tomorrow, will you sit close to the front?" He paused, surprised by the question, and nodded slowly. "If it helps you," he said, "I will." She smiled, relieved. "It will." After she left, he stayed for a long time, staring at the empty piano bench. He wondered how a young musician he barely knew had managed to bring back something he thought he had lost forever, the feeling of being alive. That night, neither of them slept easily. She kept picturing the audience, imagining the bright lights and the pressure of so many eyes watching her. He kept picturing the stage where his wife once performed years ago and where tomorrow a new memory would be made. The day of the recital was coming, and both of their lives were about to change in ways they could not yet imagine. The morning of the recital arrived with a soft chill in the air, a kind that made the world feel quiet and expectant. The girl woke before dawn, unable to fall back asleep, no matter how tightly she wrapped herself in her blanket. Her heart beat fast, and her hands felt warm with nerves. She kept imagining the bright lights, rows of seats, all those people watching. She tried to take deep breaths, but excitement and fear tangled together in her chest. She finally got out of bed and dressed carefully. She chose a simple outfit, nothing too formal, but something that made her feel comfortable and confident. She tied her hair back and looked at herself in the mirror. She didn't look like a little girl anymore. She looked like someone ready to stand in front of a hall full of strangers and tell a story through music. Across town, the judge also woke earlier than usual. He sat beside his window for a long time, staring at the pale light rising behind the trees. The day felt heavier than most, not in a painful way, but in a meaningful one. He knew the recital wasn't just a performance. It was a moment he had been unknowingly preparing for ever since he first heard her play his late wife's melody. It felt like life was offering him a chance to confront the past with new eyes. He dressed slowly, taking his time to choose a suit that wasn't too formal, but still respectful. He even wore the watch his wife had gifted him long ago, something he hadn't touched in years. As he fastened it around his wrist, he whispered a quiet apology to the silence around him, unsure whether he was speaking to himself or to her memory dot. By afternoon, the music hall was buzzing with people. Families arrived with flowers, parents carried cameras, and the soft chatter of excited voices echoed through the building. The air smelled of polished wood and warm stage lights. The girl reached early, her stomach fluttering with nervous energy. The instructors guided her backstage, telling her to relax, to breathe, to trust her practice. But it was hard to calm her mind. Her hands shook slightly every time she imagined walking onto the stage. She peeked through the side curtain, scanning the audience. For a moment, she couldn't see the judge anywhere, and her heart dropped. She wasn't sure why his presence mattered so much, but she had grown used to the comfort of his steady support. Just as she felt worry rising, she spotted him carefully moving toward one of the front seats. He sat down gently, adjusting his coat, looking calm but deeply focused, her breath released in relief. He had kept his promise. As the recital began, different students performed: violin players, singers, and pianists. Some were very confident, others nervous. The audience clapped politely after each performance. But the girl barely heard any of it. Her mind kept circling around the moment she would step on stage. When her name was finally announced, the hall grew quiet. She walked out slowly, feeling the heat of the stage lights on her face. Her eyes found the judge immediately. He wasn't smiling, but his expression held something steady and warm, a silent reassurance she needed. She sat at the piano, placing her hands on the keys. They trembled slightly, but she took a breath and held it for a moment, just like he had taught her. A deep calm washed through her as she exhaled slowly. Then she began to play. The first notes floated softly through the hall, fragile and warm, like something waking up gently. The audience fell into complete silence. The melody carried a feeling that no one could explain, a sense of longing wrapped in tenderness. Even those who didn't know the story behind the song felt something emotional rise in them. The judge sat completely still, his hands folded tightly together. The sound of the melody transported him back through years of memories, his wife sitting at the same piano, smiling at him with that bright, warm expression that softened everything. He heard her laughter in the notes, felt her presence in the gentle tempo. But it wasn't painful this time. It was bittersweet, full of warmth, not regret. Halfway through the piece, something unexpected happened. The girl changed the way she pressed the keys, just slightly, adding a softer touch the judge had not taught her. It was her own interpretation, her own heart layered into the melody. And for a moment, it felt like the song didn't belong to the past anymore. It belonged to the present, to this hall, to this connection between a young musician and a grieving man. A thin tear formed at the corner of the judge's eye, but he didn't wipe it away. He let it fall, quietly, almost gratefully. When she reached the final note, she held it gently, letting it fade slowly into the air. The silence afterward felt sacred, like the breath after a prayer. Then the audience erupted into applause. It wasn't polite applause. It was warm, genuine, full of heartfelt emotion. The girl stood from the bench, her breaths uneven from both nerves and relief. She looked at the judge again. To her surprise, he stood up, not in a rushed way, but with a slow, respectful motion. He didn't clap loudly. Instead, he placed a hand on his chest, giving her a small, meaningful nod. Her eyes filled with emotion. Backstage, the instructors hugged her, praising her performance. Her friend rushed to congratulate her, saying she sounded like someone who had lived 1,000 stories. She smiled, grateful, but her heart kept pulling her toward the front of the hall, where the judge stood waiting. When she finally walked out, the audience was still chatting happily. She moved past them until she reached him. He looked at her with a softness she had never seen from him before. "You played beautifully," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. She smiled shyly. "I wanted to get it right." "You did more than that," he replied. "You gave the song life again." For a moment, both stood in silence. Then she reached into her pocket and unfolded the old sheet music he had given her. She held it out to him with both hands. "I want you to keep this," she said softly. He looked at her, surprised. "But it was a gift to help you learn." "I learned what I needed," she whispered. "And it's time it stays with the person it was meant for." His chest tightened. He took the paper slowly, running his fingers over the familiar handwriting. Something inside him shifted, a feeling he had avoided for years finally settling into peace. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. She nodded, her eyes gentle. They walked together toward the exit of the hall, moving slowly through the fading lights and murmuring voices. Outside, the sky had turned a warm golden color as the sun dipped low. The world felt calm, almost like it was listening. The judge turned to her. "You know, my wife used to say that music wasn't just about sound. She said it was a bridge between hearts." She looked at him with a soft smile. "I believe that." He nodded, looking up at the sky for a moment. "For a long time, I thought I couldn't cross that bridge anymore. But today, I think I finally did." She felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I'm glad I could help." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a gesture of respect and gratitude. "You didn't just help. You reminded me that life still has moments worth listening to." The evening breeze brushed past them, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers from a nearby garden. For the first time in a long while, the judge didn't feel the weight of loneliness. He felt connected to the world, to the present, and somehow still to his wife's memory. But in a gentler way, the girl looked at the hall behind them. "Will you keep coming to hear the students play?" He smiled lightly. "Yes, I think I will. Music shouldn't be quiet in my life anymore." She nodded, happy to hear it. "Then maybe one day I'll play something new for you." "I would like that," he said sincerely. They walked a short distance together before going their separate ways. But both carried something new inside them, something that felt hopeful and warm. The girl went home with a heart full of accomplishment and gratitude. She knew she had done more than just perform a song that day. She had helped someone heal, even if she hadn't planned to. And the judge walked home under the soft evening sky, holding the old sheet music close to his chest. For the first time in many years, he didn't feel the weight of silence following him. Instead, he felt the echo of a melody that now belonged not only to his past, but also to his future. That night, he placed the sheet music gently on top of his piano at home. The same piano that had been untouched for years now felt alive again. He sat on the bench, took a deep breath, and slowly laid his fingers on the keys. He played the opening notes. His hands trembled, but not from pain. From memory, from gratitude, from something bright beginning again. The melody filled the quiet room, warm and steady. And somewhere deep inside him, a long closed door opened softly. The girl, miles away, lay in bed replaying the day in her mind, a gentle smile resting on her lips. She drifted off to sleep with the melody in her head, feeling proud and peaceful. Two lives, different in every way, had crossed because of one forgotten song, a song that had brought healing, a song that had brought connection, a song that had brought light back into two hearts, and it would remain with them always.